Hello fellow geeks and welcome back to Running Geek Girl. My name is Heather and I am glad you're here because it's time for another look into some running history. One of my favorite races that I love to read about and watch documentaries about is the Western States Endurance Run. That's a 100-mile race that takes place at the last full weekend of every June. The race starts at the Squaw Valley Ski Resort and it ends at the track at Placer High School in Auburn, California. Runners have to deal with extreme temperature changes. There is heat, snow, sometimes torrential rain. They will ascend 18,090 feet and descend 22,970 feet. So this race is not for the faint of heart. Those who are able to finish the 100 miles within the 30-hour time limit will be awarded with the bronze belt buckle, and those who finish within a 24-hour time limit will be awarded the coveted silver belt buckle. The race is sponsored by Ultra, and it's one of the 5 races that are part of the Grand Slam of ultra running. However, if you go back to the beginning of where the race came from, you wouldn't be running this with a pair of running shoes. You would be on a saddle. Let's begin. Western States began as a trail ride. It was founded in 1955 by Wendell Roby. The race itself was set on a historic trail that was used by gold miners in the 1800s. It had been lost to time and then rediscovered in the 1930s. Roby and his associates wanted to prove that horses could still make that 100-mile trek within 24 hours. And thus, the Tevis Cup was born. The Tevis Cup was awarded to the first rider that crossed the finish line with their horse, so long as their horse was then looked over and deemed fit. Any rider that finished within 24 hours would be awarded a silver belt buckle. The race started with only 5 riders. By the 1970s, it had grown in popularity and was known as the hardest riding event in the entire world. Because of that, they ended up having to cap entries at the first 250 to enter. No one had thought of attempting to do this 100-mile trek on foot until 1972. It was this year that 20 members of the U.S. Army, along with 10 extra volunteers to work as crew, decided to prove that they could march this in full fatigues within 48 hours. The march took place the same time as the Tevis Cup, and the soldiers were allowed to take the course before the riders left on their trek. Wendell Roby selected rider Jim Larimer to act as a special guide for the soldiers as they continued on the trail. Larimer and his horse took to the trail with the soldiers a full day before the other riders were able to start their race. Now, despite knowing that they would be in difficult terrain and that it would be a full 100 miles in full fatigues, meaning they were wearing their combat boots and not cushy running shoes, many of the soldiers admitted that they were ill prepared for what lay ahead of them. They were not used to the altitude, they were not used to moving around up and down on trails. Many times they ran very low on water. At all the aid stations, their volunteers were there to meet them with MREs so that they could recharge, sometimes change shoes and socks, and then start on their way again. Many of the soldiers dropped out along the way. Those who still continued broke off into groups of 2 and 3 and marched together. Finally, in 44 hours and 54 minutes, 6 soldiers were able to cross the line. They were First Lieutenant Larry M. Hall, Specialist 4 Gregory Bellegarde, Sergeant Michael Paduano, Specialist John Johansson, Sergeant David E. Lanau, Sergeant Kenneth Crusoe, and Private First Class Michael Savage came along 2 hours after the others. They had made it to the end, and all of the soldiers said that they had no regrets for doing this, but they would most likely not tackle something like this ever again. It wasn't until 2 years later in 1974 that someone would be crazy to try something like that again. Gordy Ainslie had finished the Tevis Cup in 1971 on his horse Rebel and in 1972 on his horse Rattlenose. In 1973, his horse was pulled at the 29-mile checkpoint and he was unable to finish. In 1974, he wanted to compete in the trail ride again, but had neglected to get a horse ready in time for the race. Drusilla Barnes, at the time, was the secretary of the Western States Trail Foundation, encouraged him to just try and run it on foot. After all, being 200 pounds, which was a little bit heavy for a horse rider, he was accustomed to having to get off of his horse at different times during the trail ride and have to walk along beside it. why not tackle the whole thing on foot? At that point, Ainsley had already competed in several marathons and ultramarathons and had fairly good times in all of them. So the night before the trail race started, he got his sleeping bag, crawled into a horse trailer, and spent the night, waking up early in the morning to a breakfast of shredded wheat and buttermilk, and put on what he was going to wear for the race that day. He had a pair of yellow shorts. In order to stop chafing, he had a cut-off pair of pantyhose that he secured to his legs with white athletic tape. And instead of a bib, he had a white cotton t-shirt, and a black marker had written a number 0. He waved his goodbyes to the officials at the start of the race and began on his way. After a while, the horses started the race and were able to catch up with him. Unfortunately, there are several places that are single file on that trail, and so he had to get single file with the horses and run at their trotting pace. It was about 7:30 minutes per mile. Mile 29, a friend of his named Helen was supposed to meet him with an extra pair of running shoes that were a bit more comfortable than the ones he had started with. Unfortunately, she was not able to find them, so that little bit of comfort he was looking forward to was just not going to happen. He had a couple of packages of electrolytes with him that he would take in, along with some water from streams nearby. He had also managed to hide about 10 bottles of Gatorade throughout the course of the track, and got a can of peaches from a rider that was nearby. Other than that, there was nothing else for him at the aid stations because they were set up for the horses. All that was available there was water, hay, and grain. Just before mile 55, he came across a horse that was clearly dying and was unable to help it. As he ran on, he met up with another friend of his. Diane Ripley was there at mile 55 to meet him with some salt tablets and some water. At that point, he expressed his concerns to her that he was not going to make it and that he should probably just drop out. She gave him the water, the salt tablets, walked up and down his back and helped massage his legs. He waited for about 30 minutes and then decided he could probably just carry on, and so he did. At mile 75, his girlfriend Pat met him and gave him a Pepsi. Again, some of the only aid that he had at those stations. When it came to a part where the horse riders would have to ride across a stream, which is, by the way, still part of the race course today, he decided to hitch a ride with a rider that was crossing the stream on her horse. He ended up dating that horse rider off and on for the next couple of years. Ainsley pressed on and at 23 hours and 42 minutes entered the fairgrounds at the end of the race, did a 3/4 victory lap, and then dove into a forward somersault at the finish line. Everybody there enjoyed the spectacle. Of course, they gave him his buckle that he had earned, but they assumed nobody else is ever going to want to do this competitively again. How wrong they were. The next year, a runner named Ron Kelly tried to do the same thing. He started along with the horses, but he dropped out after 97 miles. So close. In 1976, Ken Cowman Shirk completed in 24 hours and 30 minutes, with Ainsley himself pacing him for the last 25 miles. Obviously, the interest was there, and so in 1977 was the first official Western States endurance run. 16 runners started. Of those 16, 13 dropped out before the end. However, Andy Gonzalez was able to finish within the 24-hour time limit. The other 2 runners were able to finish in 24 hours and 30 minutes unofficially. So this led to the establishment of the 30-hour time limit and the creation of the bronze belt buckle. The next year, in 1978, there were 68 competitors, of which 30 finished. And the race has been building and growing from there and has become a symbol of what the human body can do when you push. States Endurance Run is absolutely fascinating to follow every single year. There is a fantastic documentary that's available here on YouTube that I'm going to put a link to down below called Life in a Day, about many of the female runners who run the Western States Endurance Race. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this interesting. If you did, make sure that you let me know by giving me a thumbs up or commenting down below. If you haven't already, why don't you subscribe to the channel? It's absolutely free and you can keep caught up on all the running content that I have here on this channel. Why don't you subscribe to me on social media? You can find the links down in the description. I'm available across all platforms under the name Running Geek Girl. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and I can't wait to see you next time. Happy running! The race started with only 5 the race